Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday episode of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone's having a great week and looking forward to a great weekend. Excuse me, still fighting this cough a little bit. Wanted to go over a few things today. Part of this is going to be kind of to do with society, as I'm going to inject some information that I think is important for everybody to hear. But let's start off. First thing I'll do is go over a little bit about real estate, of course. And in the Orlando market, I feel that housing inventory has completely stabilized now. What I mean by that is we're pretty much in alignment between buyers and sellers. So I would call that a neutral market. The byproduct of that is the buyers that we're working with now are expecting more negotiating flexibility. So that's something that sellers need to be prepared for and not take it personally. It's just a byproduct of how the market's transitioned, that a higher percentage of buyers will want to negotiate off the asking price or maybe will ask for some closing cost concessions. So these are just things to consider when you place a home on the market and how you set the asking price along with all the other variables that I went over. The other thing that I'm finding with buyers, they're more selective. So they're more critically looking at the particular house they're looking at relative to the price, relative to the competition, and relative to the improvements or lack thereof that a particular home has. So they're taking all that into account, and it's not like it was a few years ago where, if a house was in okay condition and there was nothing major wrong with it, people would put in strong offers. Now buyers are buying more from a position of calmness, so they're making more rational, informed decisions. So these are just things that sellers need to be aware of. And of course, if you're a buyer, you have a much better environment in finding a nice home that meets your requirements at a fair price. There are some potential good news on the horizon. It is expected that the next Federal Reserve meeting, which should take place sometime during October, will reduce interest rates. Assuming that happens, I would expect it'll translate to around 0.25% to 0.5% reduction on mortgage rates. So that should drive mortgage rates closer to 6%, maybe even possibly under that. But they're definitely going to go down a little bit if that change takes place. So that should be good for the real estate market in general, and it should be good for both buyers and sellers. And as always, when you're entering the real estate market, regardless of whether you're a seller or buyer, timing is always important in order for you to make the most informed decision and fulfill your objectives, whether you're selling or buying. As always, I'm always glad to give you a comprehensive no-cost review of your situation, and I try to evaluate the best options and opportunities for you based on what you tell me your objectives are. For example, if you're a buyer and you give me various criteria and you say you want to be into a property within 6 months, I would give you a blueprint for that. On the other hand, if you're a seller that's going to be relocating on a job situation and you're going to start in your new destination in 60 days, I would give you a blueprint on how to best accomplish that. So everything that I recommend is individualized and it's based on the information that you share with me. So when I sit down with you, I try to get as much information as possible. And of course, we can help you purchase a property, we can help you list a property, and we do also offer property management. There are folks that maybe property management seems like it might be a viable alternative to selling their home. So these are just some things to keep in mind. Transitioning to sports, for our football fans, the NFL season started last night, It had the defending champion Philadelphia Eagles against the Dallas Cowboys. The game took on additional interest because besides the Eagles being the defending champions, the Dallas Cowboys had recently traded arguably their best player, Micah Parsons. So everybody was interested in seeing how that affected the Cowboys' performance and their overall mentality. It was a good game. It was very competitive. The Cowboys ended up losing a close one, 24-20. The only thing that marred the game were two things. Before the games first started, and there was some back and forth between Dak Prescott and Jalen Carter, one of the Eagles' top defensive players. Not sure what was said, but there was some spitting caught on tape, unfortunately, a kind of a knucklehead move. And Jalen Carter was ejected from the game before he had even made a play. So that was a loss to the Eagles, but they were able to overcome that. Secondly, there was a big rain and lightning storm that took place in the third quarter, so there was a big delay in the game. And that seemed to affect the quality of play a little bit because in the first half, both teams were going up and down the field, scoring pretty much at ease. And from the third quarter till the end of the game, there was only 3 points scored. So while the game stayed competitive, it was definitely not the offensive show in the second half that people would have expected. Transitioning to baseball, baseball's in its last month of the season. And all the pennant races are pretty competitive right now. The only one that looks like it may be over is the Philadelphia Phillies. Look like they have a comfortable lead in their division, but all the other divisions are very competitive right now. Baseball is very even this year, so it's hard to predict who's going to be the eventual favorite to win the World Series and or even just get into the World Series. So the season will end in approximately just under 4 weeks from today, and then the baseball playoffs start. So now I'm going to transition to kind of my pet peeve / thing that I think is important to bring up. And it's an issue that I've talked about a little bit in the past, but it really came to the forefront yesterday. For those of you that are listeners of mine, you know that I express my opinions. You know that I'm very disappointed with how our politics have gone on both sides of the aisle. And you know that I'm concerned with the future of the country, especially with some of the appointments that President Trump made, which border on the absurd, incompetent, and extreme. He made like 4 or 5 really, in my opinion, very concerning appointments. But the worst one I thought was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has extreme positions. He doesn't really have the medical background to be in charge of our Health and Human Services Division. He states things and opinions without having facts, and he makes up things, and he's just a threat to our overall healthcare policies in the United States. Well, what he's done recently is he's making it harder to get certain viruses, for example, the COVID virus. He's making a little bit more hoop jumping to get through. He's an outspoken critic of vaccines in general. He cites all these studies that he's made up. Especially, he claims that there's direct and causal information that the vaccines have affected thousands of autism cases, and that's simply not the case. He won't admit really that vaccines are good for the safety and health of the country. So anyway, yesterday he had to go before Congress in a hearing format to get questioned and to try to explain his positions. Well, it became very adversarial. And again, he just kind of either overlooked things, lied about things he had said before, or made up things. The interesting thing about yesterday's hearings, I thought, was you expected, of course, the Democrats to come up with a lot of negative things during the question and answer session because they had pretty much universally opposed his appointment. The Republicans, on the other hand, even though there was a lot of concern on their aisle, they're quite honestly intimidated and scared of President Trump, that if they don't go along with his agenda, he's going to come out very strongly against them and try to do what's called primary them, make it hard for them to win the Republican primaries in the upcoming midterm elections. But even some of the Republicans, you could see by the tone of their questions, are very concerned by his negative position and falsehoods that he keeps stating about vaccines. He tried to straddle something yesterday that was obviously ridiculous. He wanted to nominate President Trump for a Nobel Prize, in large part because of his shepherding of getting the COVID vaccine to market in a record fashion. But then on the other hand, he kept saying how unsafe the COVID vaccine was, how it wasn't properly vetted, how it's caused a lot of health problems for people that took the vaccine. And when he was questioned on the dichotomy of criticizing the vaccine versus complimenting President Trump, he really didn't have a satisfactory answer. The Republicans that were trying to question him in a negative fashion, because they didn't want to come out and criticize President Trump's appointment of him, even though President Trump's the one that appointed him, they tried to use Kennedy's words against him from the standpoint of, by him criticizing the COVID vaccine, he was criticizing President Trump, and that they also tried to be concerned about health care in this country because, a lot of people listen to this information. We've increasingly over the past 5 or 10 years had an increasing number of skeptics of vaccines based on false information. So the amount of children that have been vaccinated, that percentage has declined over the last 5 to 10 years. So when public officials with a big platform come up with these things to scare people that are already skeptical of vaccines, it can cause a very negative effect. Now, I just wanted to cite some statistics because I'm all about statistics. If you've heard me talk, whether it's about real estate, government, whatever, I try to cite statistics to go along with any opinions I state. Anybody can make up anything, but statistics are facts. And I just wanted to point out, until we've had some famous vaccines, we had tremendous health care issues in this country on certain things. For example, before we had the smallpox vaccine, people that got smallpox, they had a mortality rate of 20 to 50%. The smallpox vaccine started in the U.S. approximately in the 1850s. And do you know from smallpox, prior to the vaccine getting widespread use, approximately 300 million people on a worldwide basis died from smallpox. And the vaccine was so effective in smallpox that they stopped having to give people the vaccine in 1972. So we've basically had almost no cases of smallpox in almost 50 years. So I would say that's an example of a successful vaccine. Another couple vaccines that have proven very successful were the measles vaccine. For example, in 1919, we had 175 cases of measles for every 100,000 people that were in the population. Furthermore, we had about 12 and a half deaths in the United States in 1919 per 100,000 people. In 2024, we had less than one case of measles per 100,000 people. So again, think about that. In a 105-year period for the measles vaccine, we went from 175 cases to less than one in 2024. Now you're starting to see more measles cases again, and there's great concern about that because, again, people that are saying these vaccines aren't safe, there's a lower rate of people getting vaccinated, so you're starting to see more measles transmission in the last year and a half in the United States. And again, keep this statistic in mind. In 1919, we had almost 13 deaths per 100,000 people from measles. In 2024, we had 0 deaths from measles. So I'd say that's a pretty factual comparison that shows the efficacy and success of measles. One last vaccine that I will bring up is the polio vaccine. In the U.S., in 1952, we had a peak of 3,145 deaths, and we had over 57,000 cases of polio in 1952. Out of those 57,000 cases, over 21,000 of them were what they call the paralytic polymyelitis, and that meant that 21,000 people had some sort of paralysis from polio. And if you remember in history, one of our presidents, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served almost 4 terms as a president and was considered one of the better presidents we've ever had, he was wheelchair bound for a good bit of his life because he was a polio survivor. Polio was a terrible disease that was affecting the country, but we've pretty much eradicated most of it. And the Salk vaccine, which was the polio vaccine, was introduced in around 1955. And so it's done a great job. And these vaccines work. They have a lot of studies that go into them, and they're designed to save lives, to save illnesses. Plus, one of the hidden benefits of these, besides the humanity, is the cost savings. Think of all these people that have these diseases, whether they pass away or just have a lot of symptoms. Think about the cost in terms of the healthcare expenses to treat these folks, the stress and issues that those cause families. I mean, the societal cost along with the monetary cost is just tremendous. And then, of course, what is human life worth? I don't think any of us want a innocent person to die from these diseases when these diseases could be avoided. And now for Kennedy to come out and have all these questions that he's posing about the COVID vaccine without any kind of anecdotal evidence is, to me, just disgusting. And he's somebody that Trump should get rid of. Where President Trump, and it's not so much do I have a philosophical disagreement with him, because we can all have our own political views, but I look at the type of people that you appoint that are going to be advising you and setting policy in this country. And he's just appointed some tremendously unqualified people who are threats to our way of doing life in this country. And again, I think you need to put pressure on your politicians. I know that a lot of people in Congress want to get rid of Kennedy. And it's so obvious that he is incompetent and his views border on the ridiculous. And it's one thing for somebody to have ridiculous views, that's their prerogative. But when they're affecting a country of, what do we have, 300 or 400, I don't know, I don't even know our population, 300 or 400 million or more. And I'm probably way under just giving. And you have one person with such extreme viewpoints that are affecting our entire population. It's a cause for great concern. And I think that these things need to be talked about and talked about tremendously. And when you go to the polls in the midterm elections, which are going to be held in 2026, I believe, you need to keep these things into account. But we need to get rid of Kennedy now. Every day that he's in office, he's a bigger threat to our way of doing life. So that's all for today. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Again, stay hydrated. Let's hope that this latest hurricane storm that they say may form in the next week doesn't impact Florida too much, but it's too early to tell right now. But keep your eyes and ears open on that. And this is Marty Kaiser out.